Це наша частина друга, тому якщо ви не дивились частину першу, ми вам дуже радимо подивитись частину першу. І наш сьогоднішній спікер, який був також нашим спікером у першій частині, це Девід Кларк, міжнародний юрист у сфері громадського здоров'я та прав людини, правовий радник програми з харчування UNICEF. Він допомагав більше ніж 60 країнам у розробці законодавства для впровадження Міжнародного кодексу маркетингу замінників грудного молока та працював над впровадженням цього кодексу в системі охорони здоров'я разом з ініціативою «Лікарня доброзичлива до дитини». Якщо у вас є питання, будь ласка, задавайте їх в коментарях, і ми наприкінець будемо їх задавати, перекладачі будуть їх перекладати. Тому прошу Девіда починати, а питання, ми будемо раді всім питанням, будь ласка, пишіть їх в коментарях.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Although it's only morning here, but I'm very happy to be here with you to talk a little bit about understanding the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. And I just wanted to point to this publication on the left, what I should know about the code. It's a UNICEF guide to implementation, compliance, and identifying violations, a very useful piece for any of you who are interested in deepening your knowledge of the code. But I hope to be able to give you a reasonable background to the code this morning or this afternoon. So first of all, so that we all know what we're talking about the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes adopted by the World Health Assembly in 1981. And it is a recommendation from the World Health Assembly, which is made up of all our ministers of health, to adopt national regulations to implement the code. However, although it was adopted way back in 1981, it is updated regularly by resolutions that clarify, reinforce parts of it, expand and close loopholes. And so when we talk about the code, we're talking about the code and the subsequent resolutions. And I will be making reference to some of the important ones as I speak. So it protects parents, caregivers from the misinformation that companies very often put forward by prohibiting all advertising or any other forms of promotion of breast milk substitutes, feeding bottles, and teats. It also prohibits the use of the healthcare system to promote breast milk substitutes, feeding bottles, and teats. And I spoke about that in the last webinar that we had a while ago. It also requires governments to provide parents and caregivers with objective and consistent information on infant and young child feeding so that they can make informed decisions about how they're going to feed their babies. So the code arose out of, there was a joint meeting of WHO and UNICEF way back in 1979. And to understand that the code sometimes isn't as strong as it might be, and that's because there were 4 parties involved in drafting the code. There were governments, scientists, the industry itself, and non-government organizations. And at that meeting, they came to the conclusion that there should be an international code of marketing. And so indeed there was. And the code, one of the things I think is important about the code because it explains what it's about, it says, in view of the vulnerability of infants in the early months of life and the risks involved in inappropriate feeding practices, including the unnecessary and improper use of breast milk substitutes, the marketing of breast milk substitutes requires special treatment, which makes usual marketing practices unsuitable for these products. If breast milk substitutes are not used correctly and really not used only when they're necessary, then it can lead to problems for the infants that are not being breastfed. Next slide. So I'm going to ask you a few questions during this session, and I want you to type in the comments your answer. And my statement is there is an obligation under international law for a country to implement the code. Put in the comments if you think that is true or if it's false. I'll just give you a few seconds to do that. True or false? There is an obligation under international law for countries to implement the code. And the answer is true. While the code is a recommendation from the World Health Assembly, it is also a part of international human rights law by this time. And so several human rights bodies have called on states to fully align with the recommendations contained in the code, and adopting measures to implement the code must be recognized as a part of states' core obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and other relevant UN human rights instruments. So yeah, Ukraine is a signatory, is a state party to the CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child. Therefore, it is under an international obligation to implement the code. And this is a statement by a former deputy executive director of UNICEF, which I think is very relevant and still speaks today. Those who make claims about infant formula that intentionally undermine women's confidence in breastfeeding are not to be regarded as clever entrepreneurs just doing their job, but as human rights violators of the worst sort. So companies, when they're trying to get women to give up breastfeeding, to buy their products, they're actually violating human rights. So another question for you. The term breast milk substitutes means infant formula and follow-on formulas intended for children up to the age of 24 months. Is that true or is it false? So when we talk about breast milk substitutes, we mean all milk formulas up to the age of 24 months. Put your answer in the comments, true or false. And the answer is, it's false. Because in 2016, remember I spoke about these subsequent resolutions, we had a resolution of the World Health Assembly defining very clearly for us what breast milk substitutes are. And it means any milks, including non-dairy milks, if they're made of soy or almond or whatever, in either liquid or powdered form that are specifically marketed for feeding infants and young children up to the age of 3 years. So up to 36 months, any milk being marketed is a breast milk substitute, and that includes follow-on formula and growing up milks. So Article 2 of the code talks about the scope of the code, so it applies to breast milk substitutes, and that includes infant formula, follow-up formula, growing up milk, any other milk for children 0 to 36 months, any other food or liquid that is represented as suitable to be fed to an infant less than 6 months of age. We want exclusive breastfeeding up to 6 months. So anything marketed to be used before that is going to substitute breast milk. And bottles and teats. Under the code, there should be no advertising or other form of promotion to the general public. All completely banned, whether it's on billboards, and it also includes through Facebook, Twitter, any of the social media forms of promotion that we find nowadays, for example, YouTube videos, etc. So all of these are banned, and they should be banned in national legislation. So another question for you, true or false? Products under the scope of the code should not be sold in shops or supermarkets. We should not have these products in shops or supermarkets. True or false? If you write that in the comments section. And the answer is false. The code is intended to prohibit all forms of promotion of products under its scope, but it doesn't prohibit their sale. So it's supposed to be that mothers should only use these products on the basis of medical advice. And if they get that advice, then they should be able to buy the product in the store, but there shouldn't be advertising and promotion of these products. So in terms of more specifically what promotion can take and what should be banned, there should be no samples of products within the scope of the code given out, and there should be no point of sales advertising in the shops. So you shouldn't have special offers, tie-in sales, you know, buy one, get one free, or buy something and get a tin of formula free, or buy a tin of formula and get something else free. No discount coupons or premiums. Those are all forms of promotion that are prohibited by the code. There should be no gifts of articles or utensils. So we used to see a lot in the past, companies giving toys or whatever to parents with the name and logo of the company. That is not allowed. Even clothes with the name and logo of the company. And the companies should not be seeking direct or indirect contact of any kind with pregnant women or mothers. And this means those baby clubs that we find, that is a way of contacting directly or indirectly mothers, and they're not allowed. We don't want companies that want to sell their products to be advising mothers on how to feed their babies. So again, in this 2016 resolution, they prohibited cross promotion, and that is using the same name, the same brand name, the same thing. You can see here we're talking about biscuits that have the same name as the infant formula. So when companies promote the biscuits, they're also promoting their other brands. That is not allowed because they are indirectly promoting their infant formula. So that is not allowed. Okay, I'm going to be talking about the labels of formulas of products under the scope of the code. So I'm going to ask the question, labels of breast milk substitutes and complementary foods should inform consumers of the health benefits of the products. Is that true or false? The label should be saying, this will be good for your baby's growth. It will make your child smarter. Is that allowed? True or false? It's not allowed. Put it in the comments, true or false. And of course, the answer is false. There should be no health claims on breast milk substitutes for foods in infants and young children. But we still see them all the time. We have a lot of labels that claim that the product will make your child smarter, will improve your child's immune system. And we know that these are false claims. The thing that can make your child smarter or improve its health, its immune system, of course, is breast milk. So the companies are not allowed to do this, but they do it a lot. And this is the misinformation that the companies give to parents. I spoke more in depth in the last webinar about healthcare facilities. Healthcare facilities are not to be used for the promotion of products within the scope of the code. There should be no display of products. Under the 2016 resolution and guidance, companies should not be donating or distributing equipment or services to health facilities. And I went into some detail as to why this is so bad and why it is now absolutely prohibited. Health workers, they need to make themselves familiar with the responsibilities under the code, which is to promote, protect, and support breastfeeding. There should be no gifts or incentives offered to doctors or healthcare workers from the companies, and no samples of infant formula or other products within the scope of the code. The companies are allowed to give information to health workers about their products so that if it is necessary for a woman to use a breast milk substitute, they have information on the products available. However, such information must be restricted to scientific information, and it should mention the benefits and superiority of breastfeeding, the costs and dangers of artificial feeding, and the proper use of formula, and it should never create a belief that bottle feeding is equivalent or superior to breastfeeding. But below there, you have a few examples of the sorts of scientific information the companies claim it is that is given to doctors, and you can see that they are purely promotional. They contain claims, etc. So that is not allowed. Okay, another question for you. Powdered milk formulas are not sterile and may contain pathogenic microorganisms. True or false? When you buy a can of infant formula, is it sterile or true? It's not sterile, true or false? And the answer is true. We've known for quite some time, almost 20 years, that powdered infant formulas are not sterile. They can become contaminated at the factory level with heat-resistant bacteria, such as Chronobacter sakazaki, which is very, very dangerous for babies. So in 2005, 20 years ago, the WHO called on governments to inform that powdered infant formula may contain such pathogenic organisms and must be prepared and used appropriately, and ensure explicit warning on packaging. But I say, if you go out and try and find packaging of infant formula with this warning, I'd be surprised, because the companies do not want this information to be made public. The World Health Organization and the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, came up with guidance on how to prepare formula as safely as possible and avoid this contamination. So you need to, the water should be no cooler than 70 degrees centigrade. So do not leave it for more than 30 minutes after boiling. So you need to use very hot water to kill this bacteria. And this is not just theoretical, because recently in the United States, we've had a number of cases of babies being harmed and dying from this contamination. But just to let you see what the companies do, this company is instructing how to make a baby bottle, and it says, let the water cool to room temperature before adding formula. Making formula with boiling water can cause clumping and decrease the nutritional value. So they're actually trying to get parents to prepare the formula in a way that is contrary to the advice of the World Health Organization and could lead in contamination. And indeed, in the United States, it has. So here we have things in the press, baby formula recall, after another baby dies of Chronobacter. So it is actually happening in the United States. I recently looked at an update. So in which country, I'm trying to remember which state that was. But anyway, there's been a $60 million jury verdict in the first trial, holding manufacturers cow-based formula accountable for causing necrotizing enterocolitis in premature infants. And another case in St. Louis, there's a 495. So this is it actually happens, and you can see that it has implications for the health and even the survival of babies. So in terms of labeling, product labels must clearly state the superiority of breastfeeding, the need for the advice of a healthcare worker before using the product, and a warning about health hazards. There should be no pictures of infants or other pictures or text idealizing the use of formula. And you know that many of the formulas labels have pictures of teddy bears or cute little toys, etc., all to try and encourage. This is a promotional aspect of the labeling, which is not allowed. Labels should have the warning that powdered infant formula may contain pathogenic microorganisms. Labels on complementary foods should not cross-promote breast milk substitutes, shouldn't promote bottle feeding, and should state the importance of continued breastfeeding. Okay, shifting to another topic about the code. I'm asking, or I'm saying, there are exceptions to the code for emergencies or humanitarian settings. So should the code be applied in humanitarian settings when there's an emergency, or is that an exception? If you think that there are exceptions in emergencies, say true, and if not, say false. Just take a moment and write it in the comments. And of course, the answer is false. Many would say that the code is even more important in emergencies because infants and young children are the most vulnerable folks in an emergency setting, where very often sanitation, access to clean water becomes an issue, and trying to use formula is very dangerous. So even in healthy populations, child morbidity and crude mortality can increase by 20% in 2 weeks during an emergency. And in emergencies, rates of child mortality can increase from 2 to 70 times, according to these studies. So breastfeeding, breast milk become much, much more important, and the code becomes even more important to make sure that the emergency is not being used as a marketing opportunity for companies. So again, the code protects and promotes breastfeeding, so it's very important in emergencies. It talks about the proper use of breast milk substitutes when required. So it stops the aggressive marketing of products covered by the code, and it sets out the responsibilities of the infant food industry, health workers, governments, and organizations. So it's really important in emergencies to control donations when the companies want to dump formula in an emergency situation. It prevents the distribution of unsuitable products, and it prevents companies from using emergencies to increase market share for public relations, all things that they do. I want to talk briefly about foods for infants and young children. I mentioned 2 or 3 times now this 2016 resolution, which adopted guidance covering commercially produced foods for infants above the age of 6 months. So I'm going to ask you the question, or I'm going to make the statement: there should be no promotion of commercially produced complementary foods. True or false? If you can write that in the and this is kind of a difficult one because it sort of depends. It's not really true or false, because in terms of this guidance, foods for infants and young children, complementary foods, should only be promoted if they meet relevant standards of composition, safety, quality, and nutrition levels, and are in line with national dietary guidelines. And this is really important because work done by the World Health Organization in Europe in particular has found that many of the complementary food products on the market, snacks, things in pouches, are not nutritionally adequate, and in fact have too much fat, salt, etc. So countries need to have standards in place before they should be allowed, before they should allow the advertising or promotion of products, to make sure that the products being promoted are up to a certain standard and are not contributing to the already problematic issue of overweight and obesity, for example. Now, I spoke in the last webinar about conflict of interest, avoiding conflict of interest. And I want to just reiterate that companies are not allowed to have, are not allowed to be interfering in the healthcare system. So there should be no free samples passed on through health workers, no donated equipment or services to health facilities, no gifts or incentives to healthcare staff, no use of healthcare facilities to host events, contests, or campaigns. Companies should not be giving gifts or coupons to parents, caregivers, and families. They should not be using, they should not anywhere, but particularly in healthcare facilities, be providing education to caregivers on infant and young child feeding. Again, we don't want the companies that want to sell more of their products to be telling parents how to feed their babies. Excuse me. The only information being given to health workers about the product should be scientific and factual. And very importantly, baby food companies should not be sponsoring meetings of health professionals and other scientific meetings. And I just wanted to talk about this new resource, again, available. I spoke about the one, what you need to know about the code. This is another very good one, Protecting Infant and Young Child Nutrition from Industry Interference and Conflicts of Interest. They're all available on the Global Breastfeeding Collective website for free to download. So if you feel like having a look at that, then take a look. Implementation and monitoring. This is another important aspect of the code. So governments are called upon by the World Health Assembly to take action to give effect to the code. But we also know that under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, they're under an obligation to do so. And we want, governments are responsible for monitoring implementation of the code. And they must, there was a resolution in 1996 calling on governments to ensure that monitoring the application of the code is carried out in a transparent, independent manner, free from commercial influence. We don't want the companies to help us to implement the code, to monitor the code. You don't ask the fox to guard the hen house, as we say sometimes. They're the ones that are being monitored. We don't want them involved in monitoring themselves. It's the government's obligation to do that independently. Just so you know, the NET code, which was set up by WHO and UNICEF, it provides protocols that help governments set up independent, sustainable monitoring systems, and they are available. So I just want to look at how Ukraine does in terms of code implementation. Again, I looked into this previously, but just to remind us that Ukraine, at the moment, it scores 34 out of 100, meaning that mothers and babies are not being, and health workers, I have to say, are not being adequately protected against the influence and manipulation of the baby food industry. So where in particular? Well, in terms of the products that are regulated in Ukraine, there's only a score of 6 out of 20. So we really need to increase the coverage of the products because as it stands, it allows for cross-promotion. It allows for, it doesn't prohibit the promotion of all formulas up to the age of 36 months, for example. In terms of informational education materials, 0 out of 10, meaning that parents are not getting the independent, unbiased scientific information they require in order to make informed decisions. promotion to the general public, only 8 out of 20. So there are a lot of loopholes that enable the companies to continue to promote their products to the public. And then when it comes to promotion in the healthcare facilities, 0 out of 10. So you can be pretty sure that the companies know this, and they will be focusing very much on promoting their products through the healthcare facilities. And again, in terms of engagement, this conflict of interest area, only 2 out of 15, and labeling 10 out of 15. So there's still room for improvement there. But I think I think it shows us that there really is a need to strengthen code implementation, monitoring, and enforcement in Ukraine in order to protect the general public, to protect babies and mothers, also to protect the healthcare system. And I hope that we are going to be able to do that. So in conclusion, I would say that code implementation is an effective measure to decrease harmful marketing practices that undermine breastfeeding. And we do have evidence that, the better the code implementation, the less the public is exposed to promotion, and the better breastfeeding rates are. Governments have an international human rights obligation to take measures to protect infant feeding, including by implementing the code. Lack of regulation allows companies to continue to undermine caregivers' rights to make informed decisions about the child's right to the highest attainable standard of health, and Ukraine needs to strengthen its code regulations to better protect mothers and children. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to, I know that you've been perhaps asking questions in the comments section, so I'm very happy to answer those.
Дуже дякую, Девід, за презентацію. Є в нас питання від учасників. Пані Вікторія Тарасова питає, хто в Україні контролює порушення кодексу, зокрема щодо рекламних акцій? І я навіть більш ширше зроблю питання пані Вікторії, а хто взагалі його повинен контролювати і як це на практиці виглядає?
Okay. I think in terms of what is actually happening in Ukraine at the moment, I think I might take the easy way out and ask Katya to maybe explain a bit.
Тоді, Девід, парафразую питання. Як це практично виглядає, наприклад, в іншій країні, Великій Британії, чи в Штатах, чи десь ще? Ось ви заходите, наприклад, в якийсь супермаркет і бачите, що код порушується, або в лікарню. Що ви робите? Хто що робить?
Okay, that's clear to me what the question is, and the answer would be it varies from country to country. It's up to the country to figure out, and this is something we would encourage countries to do, like Ukraine, to see where does monitoring happen. Who is responsible in your country for monitoring in the media, for example? So in some countries, it would be actually the Ministry of Communication or Media that would be monitoring there. In terms of if you go into a shop and you see a violation, who monitors there? Well, in several countries, it would be the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, who already go into stores, markets to make sure that certain rules and regulations are complied with. In other countries, in South Africa, for example, it's the Environmental Health inspectors who do that. In other countries, they have tried to have and this involves, of course, also informing the population of the existence of these regulations, and then they allow the public, if they see a violation, to make that complaint. In the Philippines, for example, that is done through the Food and Drug Administration. They have a website that people can put information about violations. In other countries, you maybe have even NGOs. If there's a very active grassroots civil society, in some countries, the government actually delegates them. Consumer organizations, for example. So it very much depends on how other things are monitored in a country, and to try and use existing systems that are there to have them also monitor what's going on with the code.
Тоді ще розширю питання від себе трішечки. Наприклад, ви лікар, в якійсь країні обираєте на свій розсуд, який приклад вам простіше привести. І ви приходите на конференцію, і там є реклама суміші, наприклад, або конференція фінансується частково або повністю виробниками суміші. А ви проти цього. Кому ви пишете щось або говорите щось? Як ви можете на це впливати, якщо ви лікар, який прийшов на конференцію? Які є приклади з інших країн?
Well, I can give you a really good example from sort of at the international level, if you like, and that is when the Royal Society of Pediatricians from the United Kingdom were organizing one of their big international conferences, and they organized it in Egypt. And it was, well, of course, to hold a conference in another country, far away, get people to come. It was sponsored by 2 or 3 of the major formula companies. So what happened there was some of the doctors, physicians involved, who were also associated with NGOs like the International Baby Food Action Network. They wrote press releases. It was picked up by the press. There was a huge outcry, and the Royal Society of Pediatricians had to back down. They had to not take the money, and they had to change their policy and rules to say that they would not be taking money from the facility from the formula companies. In other countries, I know that it's been for example, the national pediatric associations that have taken a very strong stand on it. But of course, if it is written into your law, as it should be, then in your country, if anyone sees a conference taking place sponsored by the formula company, then it is against the law, and you report it through the appropriate channels to make sure that the law is enforced.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying, what I really want to say is that even if you don't have your law in place, with the power of the media, for example, the one I was talking about, the UK Royal Society of Pediatrics, just by raising it, getting the media interested, that was a successful way too. But we would like to see countries having this as part of the regulations that can then be enforced as part of the law.
Пані Анастасія Кузьменко питає, чи доцільно застосовувати фото дітей з дурниками або пустушками, пляшками для ілюстрації державних програм і заходів?
No, I would say that it doesn't, because what has happened over the last century is that the companies have very successfully normalized bottle feeding as the way that children are fed. If you look at any cartoons, even for children, you see that the baby is fed with a bottle. When you buy a baby for a child, very often it will come with a feeding bottle. It creates the idea that this is the norm. And so it really is promoting artificial feeding as the norm. So I would suggest particularly government campaigns to do with health, nutrition, child health. They should not have images of babies with feeding bottles. It would be much better for the protection, promotion, and support of breastfeeding to use images of mothers breastfeeding their babies, and to normalize breastfeeding, which has become sort of something that is sometimes frowned upon in public, for example. In the United States, for example, in some states, they had to adopt legislation to make sure that women were not being criminalized for indecent exposure by breastfeeding their babies in public. So we really want to try and normalize breastfeeding as the best, healthiest, safest way to feed babies. And that will not be accomplished by particularly government-supported campaigns that show bottle feeding, which suggests their support of bottle feeding rather than breastfeeding.
Пані Віра Дзьоба спитає, де і коли вперше дізнаються молоді мами про продукцію фірм у розвинених країнах?
There are so many ways, and I would say that nowadays it's through social media. The companies have spent a huge amount on digital marketing through all of the different digital platforms that there are. You have influencers who are often paid by the companies to promote their products. You have the Facebook pages of the companies, which invite, they invite people to like their posts or to share their own. For example, often they'll say, "Oh, share a photograph of your baby," or whatever. There are just so many ways. I mean, obviously there's TV advertising, there's in magazines. The companies will look for whatever whatever medium there is, that you can bet they will be there and trying to do it. But the whole digital explosion has really been hugely successful because, of course, it's very, very sophisticated, and it can be really targeted. The companies and whoever is managing the platforms, they actually mine data of consumers so that they can target specifically at them. And I don't know if any of you have ever noticed, but when I'm preparing for for something like this, and I want to Google something about infant feeding, baby infant formula or whatever, very soon, as soon as I go into a browser or whatever, an advertisement will pop up for an infant formula because they know I've been interested in it. So it's yes, there are many, many ways, successful ways that mothers are and young women are targeted.
Ще одне питання від мене. А коли ви вважаєте доречним розмовляти з лікарями про код в університеті медичному, чи вже після, коли вони виходять на роботу? З якими лікарями має сенс розмовляти? З усіма чи тільки тими, хто працює в пологовому будинку?
Well, I think the answer is that it's important to do it as early as possible before, so that the young physicians are already aware when the company approaches them and offers them, some kind of gift or incentive, or to help pay for their studies or whatever. So I think it needs to happen as soon as possible. I think it should be part of the basic medical training, because conflict of interest, of course, doesn't only happen in terms of baby food, infant nutrition. There's the whole pharmaceutical aspect of it as well. So I think that medical students very early on need to learn about conflict of interest, including the baby food industry, to set them on a. It's a kind of, if you like, it's a way of looking at whoever approaches you with offers to help. Are they actually really wanting to help you, or are they looking for an opportunity to promote their products, be it pharmaceuticals, be it infant formulas, or whatever? And in fact, sorry, I just wanted to end up saying that WHO for several years was trying to come up with a core curriculum sort of section on the code, on and the importance of the code, the obligations under the code. But I don't think that has ever reached fruition, but it would be an excellent thing. We always say prevention's better than cure, so it's better that people get this information as soon as possible, before they have been approached and perhaps influenced by the baby food industry.
Ще одне питання від мене. Ось в нашому брифі про вас, Дейвід, написано, що ви були правовим радником програми з харчування UNICEF з 95-го року. І якщо дуже, так прям взяти якісь 5 головних речей, що змінилось в світі грудного вигодовування і коду з 95-го року? Що вдалося змінити?
In 25 years? It was 25 years that I was doing it. What changed? Okay, I'm not sure if I'll get to 5. This is all off the top of my head, but I'll try. So I think one of the first things that when I started working on this issue back in the mid-90s was the issue of HIV and infant feeding, and it almost completely destroyed breastfeeding, promotion of breastfeeding, because of course at first they realized that the HIV virus, since babies very often need antibodies from their mothers to improve their immune system, but they were also getting the HIV antibodies. So the companies, the formula companies, were so happy because they thought everyone should be formula fed. Now, in countries, for example, in the developing world, where mothers, where there were high prevalence of HIV, then every mother should be given formula. Government should buy formula, give it out, and of course that was really dangerous, because if you looked at the data, then the number of children that risked getting HIV was small, but the percentage of children who risked dying because they weren't being breastfed in these circumstances was high. So we had to have there was a huge struggle to actually keep breastfeeding, even for women who were HIV negative. But of course, we managed to get through that. They realized that exclusive breastfeeding, for example, if a baby was exclusively breastfed for 6 months, there was practically zero risk of transmission of HIV. Then, of course, we had antiretrovirals, etc., and we managed to get through it without completely destroying breastfeeding. I think that would be one of the first ones. The second one was, I think there was always a huge battle about whether babies should be exclusively breastfed for 4 months or 6 months, with the companies pushing for 4 months because they wanted to be able to start promoting their complementary foods as early as possible to make more money from the complementary foods. But there was, in the early 2000s, they did a scientific review and came up with the evidence that exclusive breastfeeding should be for 6 months. And that really helped us clarify our message about optimal infant and young child feeding, exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, and continued breastfeeding for 2 years or beyond. So I think that was another important one. One of the fascinating things was because we realized companies were trying to intimidate countries that adopted strong legislation. And in 2007, the Philippines adopted very strong regulations, and the American formula companies went to court in the Philippines to get an injunction to stop the implementation of these rules. They made many claims about these rules, that they were invalid, that they went against international trade law, and that case eventually went to the Supreme Court. So it's one of the first times where the companies have really done this. The end of the day, the government won and was allowed to implement these regulations, but it was a very, how could you say, it was a very difficult process, including the lawyer who was hired by the government to support the government in defending itself was murdered. There was all sorts of things going on behind the scenes, but in the end, they won. So that's another thing. Let me see. One more was maybe about 10 years ago, the companies were trying to intimidate governments that were wanting to implement the code by saying that it went against international trade regulations. And ministries of health were very worried about this. The company said, if you implement this code, you're going to be taken before the WTO, the World Trade Organization. You're going to lose your most favored nation state. You know, you're going to be in big trouble. And there was no truth to these threats. So I think we were able to get together at the international level and come up with guidance to reassure governments that they are perfectly within their rights to protect human health, infant, young child health, through the implementation of the code, and they do not run a risk of being of falling foul of the World Trade Organization. So that was another thing that we had to deal with that was quite important. And I think this 2016 resolution that I was talking about, the one that it was very important for 2 reasons. One, that it finally gave us a really precise definition of breast milk substitute, meaning any milk product up to 36 months. And it finally gave us a list of behaviors that would be considered conflict of interest that should not be allowed. And those have been huge developments and helped us a lot in being able to say to companies, for example, no, we're not going to take your sponsorship. We're not allowed to take your sponsorship. That would be a conflict of interest. So very briefly and off the top of my head, I'm sure I've forgotten something, but those are 5 things that stick in my mind.
Mm-hmm. І, мабуть, ще останнє запитання від мене. Що б ви в першу чергу хотіли змінити в Україні в цьому сенсі? Бо ви, я знаю, вивчали всі наші документи, законодавство. З чого б ви почали в Україні?
You know, I would start actually with, and I hope after this morning, or sorry, for you this afternoon's webinar, there'll be more people who appreciate the benefits and the needs to strengthen the legislation in Ukraine. But I really do think that the fundamental thing is to start by strengthening the regulations that you have. As I mentioned, the scope is inadequate, and certainly the protections in the healthcare system are not there. So I would really like to see that resolved. I'd like to see you score a much higher score the next time WHO and UNICEF do their status report update. As I say, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Katya, to say that that UNICEF is willing to support this. We'd really encourage it. And I hope that we'll be able to do that, and that some of you will become advocates for the code for breastfeeding. I'm sure you already are advocates for breastfeeding, but for the code and strengthening the code and implementing the code.
Дуже дякую, Девіду, за цю презентацію і дякуємо всім, хто нас дивився. Англійська версія буде доступна завтра вже на каналі доктора Булавінова. Українська версія з перекладом доступна вже, і ми дуже дякуємо нашим перекладачам і сподіваємося побачити Девіда ще на одному вебінарі скоро. Дуже всім дякуємо.
Thank you.